What if I told you that just a single sound, a single word has the strength to shake the most powerful nation on this planet? Not a weapon, not a war cry, not a breaking headline, simply a word. And this word did not fall from the mouth of a president or a general, but from a diplomat who sat still calm and unwavering. It was not fired across battlefields, but whispered in the silent corridors of diplomacy. And yet it struck deeper than any bullet ever could. Today, you will witness a moment when the rhythm of the world began to shift. You will listen to the story of how Jaishankar, India's steady voice to the world, wielded not aggression but intelligence to unsettle an old order of control. And the word he chose was not for noise, but for awakening. That word did not merely invite debate, it loosened the very pillars on which Western authority had been resting. Stay with me, because by the end of this sharing, you will not only understand the word, you will taste its weight, you will sense its impact. And perhaps you will never look at power the same way again. The true power of speech in diplomacy is not in volume, but in timing and placement. On the global stage, words are not just sounds strung together, they are levers of influence, sparks of defiance, and sometimes tools of liberation. When a man like Jaishankar speaks, he is not speaking to a press gallery, he is speaking to history itself, to deep-seated perceptions, to power structures built over centuries. Each word he places is chosen with the precision of a craftsman, layered with context far beyond its dictionary meaning. International politics is not a marketplace of casual chatter. It is a grand chessboard. And in this game, language itself is the most delicate piece. A single word, if dropped at the right moment, can realign alliances, tear the mask of hypocrisy, and topple narratives polished for centuries. Jaishankar, with his profound grasp of global currents and India's rising stature, knows this better than most. The words he utters are seldom casual, they carry resonance. It is not only about what he says, but the space his silence surrounds it with. In diplomacy, silence itself is an instrument sharpened and polished. Nations often prefer restraint over open declarations, for a misstep can ripple across oceans. India too, for decades, lived with this quiet, measured, cautious, unwilling to disturb the order scripted by others. But silence, when stretched too long, begins to look like submission. This is the chord Jaishankar chose to strike. His refusal to be endlessly silent was not noise for its own sake. It was clarity delivered with precision. And when he spoke, he did not require a flood of words or the armor of jargon. One word was sufficient, spoken at the right moment. It shook chambers of influence that believed themselves immovable. That moment dismantled an assumption too old to even be questioned. For when Jaishankar placed the word decolonize into the room, it was not ornament, not accident. It was a deliberate stroke. That one word bore the weight of centuries, echoing through imperial corridors, not just in Washington, but across all of the Western mind. It signaled a break from inherited frameworks, a refusal to continue dancing to borrowed tunes, and an assertion that nations no longer live in the shadows of conquest. For too long, post-colonial societies had trimmed their pride, bent their language, even doubted their own wisdom, seeking approval from those who once ruled them. One word shattered that arrangement. In that instant, Jaishankar did not just speak for India, he spoke for the many who are weary of being instructed, corrected, and patronized. The West, particularly America, has long assumed the role of referee, pronouncing what is democracy, what is right, what is order. But with one word, that facade cracked. Decolonize was not a shout, it was a mirror. It reminded the United States that the global South is no longer a passive spectator. For decades, America's voice was carried as final, judging human rights, deciding economic directions, defining alliances. But this one word from India pierced the theater of diplomacy, calling out the illusion that dominance is permanent. It forced the United States and much of the West to look again, not as masters of narrative, but as players among equals on a shifting board. Jaishankar's tone was not fire, it was steadiness. He did not provoke for applause, nor plead for approval. That is precisely why it struck so deep. In the usual diplomatic ballet of avoiding offense, of perpetually adjusting, his voice cut through like a mountain peak above clouds. It was firm, sovereign, unapologetic, and immediately the ripples began. Media, think tanks and analysts across America turned their gaze. They saw not merely India but a wider wind moving. Nations long cautious, now beginning to stand straight. In a world used to America's judgment, suddenly the mirror was turned and India's gaze reflected back the imbalance. This was no longer just policy, it was identity speaking. For much of independent India's journey, foreign policy meant a tightrope walk, balancing alliances, avoiding collisions with dominant powers. But that day, when Jaishankar chose that one word, it became a landmark in India's self-expression. It was not just political, it was cultural. It was the sound of a civilization no longer content to let others narrate its story. It was not rejection of the world, it was acceptance of the self. Dignity was reclaimed, perception was reset, respect was demanded. India was no longer willing to let foreign approval shape its conscience or direction. The colonial lens through which it had been evaluated was cast aside, because, my friends, the world order is no longer what it used to be. For much of the last century, it was a single pole, dominated by one nation's vision and voice. That one voice dictated policies, alliances, even moral definitions. But the rise of nations like India, firm in their cultural rootedness and strategic vision, has redrawn the landscape. That one word Jaishankar used was not an isolated diplomatic strike. It was the symptom of a larger transformation, the rise of a multipolar world. In this new order, no one nation writes the rules for all. Power must be shared, debated, redefined around tables where new voices insist on being heard. And India, through the composure and confidence of its foreign minister, is no longer content with being a supporting actor. It steps forth as an author of the script. Such shifts do not comfort those who are used to command. But discomfort is the beginning of change. When Jaishankar uttered that word, he was not just India's voice, he was the voice of a restless South, Asia, Africa, Latin America, places where people understood his message. They too could speak without hesitation. And so, with one word, he spoke not just to diplomats, not just to media, but to time itself. He reminded us that true strength is not measured by decibels or missiles, but by the depth of conviction behind a word. That moment was not confrontation but clarity. It was India shedding its hesitation, standing as itself, direct, dignified and unbending. The world heard it, America felt it, and history inscribed it. Because sometimes, my friends, does not take 1,000 speeches or 1,000,000 voices. Sometimes one word spoken from stillness can rattle empires and awaken civilizations. Thank you for being here on this journey of courage, clarity and conviction. May the words you speak never be mere sound, but always echoes of your truth. May your voice rise not in anger but in strength. Stay conscious, stay unwavering, and as always, walk your path with grace.